So welcome everybody. If you're just arriving, make sure you get one of the bingo sheets because I'm going to be giving away these Belgian chocolates today. So the way it works, there's a bunch of API documentation related terms on those sheets, and you cross them out one by one as I talk about them. And it's going to be really fast because there's a lot of them to go through in 20 minutes. And then when you get a full row, you shout bingo, and you get chocolates. And I even have 2 prizes. And there's a consolation prize for people that didn't make it that I'll hand out after the slot. So before I get started, I want to say thank you. Because I'm only here today because there's a whole bunch of people that are helping me. There's my family and my kids and my wife who are home without me. And it's only because of them that I can be here. That's they enable me to do this. There's a writer team that has been helping us writing the blog posts that you'll see the content of today that I've heavily condensed. And there's a development team that is making the money that enables all of that. And I want to say thank you to those people. Besides them, there's also the community that has taught me a lot about API documentation. And there's you for showing up on the just after lunch slot, which is the killer slot. So, short word about our company. We're Pronovix. We're a developer portal specialist. We're 11 years in Drupal, and 2 years ago we decided to completely turn to developer portals. Most of the time we do enterprise portals with role-based access control and stuff like that. I travel the world going to these kind of events to collect information, record information, and then share it back to our community. And we've got a mailing list where we do that. But yeah, the link is also on the sheets. And we're working on an open source Drupal 8 product for enterprise developer portals. It's based on docs like code. That's a whole long story. If you want to hear more, talk to me later. So the first question I want to ask is, what is a developer portal? Because for a lot of people, it means very different things. And I think the first thing I want to make sure that you remember, if there's only one thing you remember from this session, is developer portals does not equal reference docs. Publishing your Swagger file is not enough. At least today and not anymore. Because Swagger docs, the specification, when you publish that, that's only for troubleshooting and for people that are in development. It doesn't address a whole bunch of other things. So what is it actually? What is a developer portal? I believe that a developer portal should be a self-service hub. It's a place where you can go and get access to APIs without having to wait for somebody to do something else. So ideally, you just go there, get your keys, and get started. It's also an interface for API strategy. So because most of the time when you go to this kind of events, people talk about public APIs. But there's a whole lot of other types of API programs. And public APIs is just one small fraction of the whole API ecosystem. So depending on your API strategy, you'll need a different portal to help you with that. And one of the most important things is that a developer portal, sorry, I got a cold at DrupalCon 2 weeks ago. One of the most important things is that a developer portal is a trust signal. It's something that helps you to tell to people, you can trust us, we're not going to disappear. And you can spend all the effort and energy that you're going to spend on integrating with our API. It's okay. And if your developer portal looks crappy and has a really bad design and doesn't look appealing and doesn't have the right content, people will not trust you. And they'll say okay, this, can I even trust this? And is this worth the investment I'm about to make? It's a lot like banks. They need these fancy buildings because it's also very ephemeral, just like with APIs. Who are the stakeholders? I think this is a very busy diagram. Originally it was round, but it got squished. So in the projection, there's I think 3 main stakeholder types. There's the ecosystem you try to build, and there's different ecosystems. So depending on that, you'll have different stakeholders. There's your API team, the people that are creating the APIs and that are creating the documentation and help you communicate about it. And there's your organization in general. And I see the developer portal as kind of like a nexus for all of that. It like brings all these people together, and you should enable all of them with your portal. In terms of ecosystems, I'll also share these slides on Twitter. So in terms of ecosystems, there's 4 typical ecosystems that people typically address. An internal one, and this is often forgotten. And funny enough, this is the biggest case that we see often, is people that come to us and like, we want a portal, but we first want to focus on internal agility. That's like the first thing we want to do. A second is partners, customers, and like the broader industry. Like if you want to make an industry portal or become like an industry maker, a matchmaker. If you want to mix them, you probably need role-based access control. And I think that's where a lot of portals fail. A lot of technologies are basically for flat portals. This is one of the things we try to address with our product. Besides that, there's also different departments in your organization. You'll be, and this was very interesting for me. It's like finding out that when you talk with developer evangelists, they're working somewhere between product, sales, and marketing, right? So and what we've seen is that some people sometimes like move from a product focus more towards a sales focus. Like we've even seen one group where the API team they actually moved from one to the other. It was kind of weird and interesting at the same time. But besides that, if you have an internal focus, you might even be talking with operational people from operations. And like all of this together makes it, again, like kind of like a nexus for your organization. The next thing is like the people that are working on your portal. Everybody has API developers, right? Without API developers, you can't build APIs, so there's no need for portals. But I believe that a sign of a mature team is that you also have tech writers and developer evangelists. Why you need these people, like tech writers will help you to improve your developer experience, and the developer evangelists, they're crucial for getting the word out. And like they help you bridge these different ecosystems. Next, developer experience. And here again, there's this really interesting thing that everybody keeps talking about downstream developer experience. And like I invented this term, but when you go to conferences, everybody's talking about how can we improve the developer experience for the developers that are going to be integrating our API into their product. And it's very much an external focused thing. It's kind of like marketing, really. But that's not the whole picture, because that's just one small part of this whole story. And I would argue that upstream developer experience is the experience of the people that are making the APIs can be as important as a downstream experience. If you want to create a system where people will be creating qualitative APIs and qualitative documentation and just generally making good APIs, you can either centralize and like force everybody to do it. Some organizations that works, kind of. It's very painful. It's not really nice. Or you can create a sort of soft governance model where you use tools and gamification to encourage people to do the right thing. And like they can do the bad thing also, but if they do the right thing, they get 5 stars instead of 1 star or something like that. And I think that for a lot of organizations that are working on internal agility and like internal APIs, I think this is something to look into. The next question, so like this is like rattling off a whole bunch of stuff, like brain dump. The next question is about what is a good MVP, a minimal viable product for a developer portal. I got asked this question, and I was like, I don't know. And this is actually a really interesting, difficult question to answer. We started making this list of all the things that you can have on a developer portal. So I think blogs can be very important because they're kind of unstructured and it can help you to prototype stuff. Landing pages are also really important because they create the face and the feeling of your developer portal. If it looks like crap, again, the trust thing. Also, they help the different audiences that are visiting your portal, because it's not just for developers, there's also other people visiting your portal, to find the right content that they need to see. Tutorials are super important because without them, people might get stuck on authentication problems or something like that. Guides, they help solve very specific problems, and they're also really good for sales because they show different use cases of how your product is going to be used, your API product is going to be used, and it helps people fantasize about how they would use your API product. Conceptual documentation, these are the documentation types that help explain weird terms or difficult terms that might be counterintuitive. Reference docs, they're still super important because without them you can't build an integration. And then you need fast API key provisioning because without that, DX kind of sucks. Oh, and SDKs. There's so many. Because they help simplify development and they also help you to implement best practices. And this is kind of really important. Because else people will just build their own SDK and do all kinds of weird things. And you're gonna get support calls because the thing doesn't work. And it's their fault. And with SDKs, you can avoid a lot of that. Like, for example, with authentication also. But that's a lot of stuff. And probably you don't want, don't go make like a portal with all these sections. Don't do that. Because people don't understand it. I think the better way of doing it is to ask all these questions. It's like, what is this? How do I get started? And so on and so on. Make sure that all of those questions are answered. There's a few more that are still missing. This is like my top list. But yeah, we will publish more about that later. But that was still not a minimum viable product because it was just way too much. So what is a minimal viable product? I think that a minimal viable product needs to answer these 4 questions. And I think you need definitely landing pages. You need tutorials, like getting started tutorials. And you need your reference docs. And preferably you also need a blog. If you don't have people that are going to write on your blog, don't do a blog. Like an empty blog is worse than no blog. But if you can, do a blog. If you can't, leave it out. Last question. What is the best way to build SDKs? Now, there's the people from API Matic that are downstairs. I think probably he's in the room. So they have their own perspective on this. I had this kind of like, okay, I don't get this. Because I said earlier, SDKs help simplifying development and encourage best practices. And I watched this one presentation by Tristan from Square, and he was talking about automated generation. I was like, okay, hold on. This Taylor Barnett from Keen, she says that it's a really bad idea to automatically generate SDKs. So what's the deal here? And I had this discussion with Tristan and Cristiano Betta, who's a developer experience consultant. And we came to this conclusion that, yes, you do need automatic generation because, especially if you're working agile and you're constantly changing your your APIs, else your SDK might be lagging behind, and that's really horrible. But you also want some manual layer. You want some manual interaction so that people that really know the internals of a certain ecosystem, like, for example, the PHP community or Symfony community or something like that, that they can add a layer of concepts that will make the API better usable and adhere to the best practices, not just coding standards, because coding, like best practices, is more than coding standards. So the thing I got from this, and we talked about it, we haven't tried it yet, so I would love to hear if anybody here tried this. Actually, this is kind of what Square does. They have been tweaking their automatic generation so that they have like a best practices layer that sits on top of this automatic generated part, and then they test the whole thing to see if it still works. And I think this is probably the best way of doing it. But we're going to be experimenting with this and blog about it again. And then the last one, last takeaway, make sure to write your onboarding tutorials for your SDKs, not for your APIs. Bingo? Bingo? Okay. So, and that's the end of the talk. Yes, so you were first there. Yeah. I'll give you guys one. Share. There's more chocolates at the end of the session. You're welcome. A little bit of feedback. So if you're interested in all of this, I love the work of Nordic APIs, and we're an avid reader, and we'll probably be publishing some articles with Nordic APIs. But we are focusing specifically on developer portals and API documentation. We're coming from the open source community. We like sharing, and one of the core things about our publications is be generous and vulnerable. So we say the stuff we don't know. If you like that kind of news, we've got one weekly newsletter that we send out on this list. There's also the link on the sheets. And after this segment, I'll be handing out chocolates at the exit. Or you can leave your business card, and then I can also subscribe you. That's it. Thank you very much.